this science is part of Kebala. So says nature in the dialogue between nature and a son of philosophy, written by the Frenchman Egidius de Vardis or Gilles Duguez in 1521. Nature sardonically states that philosophers treating of alchemy make such use of enigmas, riddles, and puzzles that Pythagoras teaches as much by his silence as they do with their writings. Okay, that doesn't sound promising, does it? At the time Gilles was writing, early in the 16th century, the Jewish esoteric tradition of Kabbalah was still a relatively new phenomenon in the Christian West. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola had brought Kabbalah to the attention of the learned West in 1486, with his challenge to the papacy to debate his 900 philosophical, kabbalistical, and theological conclusions, 119 of which were provocative statements on the science of Kabbalah, including this notorious statement that got him accused of heresy: there is no science that assures us more of the divinity of Christ than magic and Kabbalah. Okay. I should mention that in the dialogue of nature and the philosopher, nature adds the proviso that the Kabbalah that she is talking about can only be transmitted by someone who knows the proportion of weights. This gets at least a slight amount of clarification a little later in the dialogue, in this chapter, chapter 14. All things are dependent on numbers. Indeed, the elements are bound by certain numbers. The same chapter reveals one of Gilles' authorities on Kabbalah to be our Italian philosopher, Pico della Mirandola. Indeed, Gilles most likely had one of the conclusions in mind for the title of his chapter, the 25th magical conclusion, where Pico states, just as characters are proper to a magical work, so numbers are proper to a work of Kabbalah. True, Pico is thinking here primarily of the alphanumeric nature of Hebrew and actually Greek letters at the time, while Gilles seems to be thinking of the relative proportional weights of all chemical substances. But nature, in the dialogue, is evidently arguing that Kabbalah is the umbrella term for both these considerations. Gilles was evidently quite well read in Christian Kabbalah, for he was also familiar with the work of the German humanist Johann Reuchlin, who promoted a blend of authentic Jewish sources, not necessarily all of them Kabbalistic sources, some Midrashic as well, with Neo-Pythagorean philosophy. In 1517, 4 years before the appearance of Gilles' dialogue, Reuchlin published his mature work on Kabbalah, On the Kabbalistic Art, which became the favored textbook for this new Christian Kabbalah for the next 150 years. There, Reuchlin's representative of Jewish Kabbalah, Shimon ben Eleazar, when discussing the idea of deification with the argument that life tends upwards by instinct, draws a comparison with alchemy. Quote, for the finer metals bubble up to form superior vapors when drawn out by the art of alchemy. So whatever is higher is seen as being purer. And I know that's not much to go on for a connection between alchemy and Kabbalah, but it sowed seeds in some alchemical souls who became interested in the subject. From Pico, Reuchlin, and other conduits like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, Francesco Giorgi, and Arcangelo de Borgonovo, the 16th century reader learns that Kabbalist law had two main preoccupations, the work of creation, and now I'm going to embarrass myself, is it Ma'aseh Bereshit, and then also the Ma'aseh Merkava, the work of the chariot. So for the Christian Kabbalists, the disciplines of cosmogony and theosophy. Christian exegetes quickly discovered that the Kabbalistic interpretation of Scripture held one fundamental methodological difference. The orthodox Christian interpreter finds meaning while leaving the text itself intact. The Kabbalist, however, literally reshapes and transforms the written testament by decomposing or atomizing the text into its constitutive elements, the Hebrew letters, or parts of letters. These are combined and permuted. I sort of feel I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, talking to a Jewish audience about Kabbalah. Anyway, these are permuted following certain methods, gematria and so forth.
Not all of us are Jewish.
Okay, thanks. The individual letters even at times being reduced to their constituent parts, such that a whole plethora of new meanings can be discovered or invented in seemingly familiar material. I'm sort of holding my water in my hand and not drinking it. I'll put it down. For at least some of the alchemists puzzling over the intransigent mysteries both of medieval manuscripts that they can't really interpret, and earthly matter, which they're still struggling to interpret, the Kabbalist reduction of language to its elemental letters must have seemed analogous to their own reduction of matter to its prima materia, the Kabbalistic permutation of letters and words comparable to the alchemical circulation and recombination of elements and qualities. The fact that both sciences were concerned with knowledge of creation, that Moses was both the author of the creation narrative in Genesis and the recipient of Kebala on Mount Sinai, and that this most secret science of Kebala was said to give knowledge of all natural things, was almost guaranteed to hold appeal for learned adepts eager for new ways to negotiate the labyrinths of alchemical texts. Okay, here we are, I'm already behind, there we are, 2 slides. This mosaic knowledge of nature must have seemed particularly significant to those familiar with the alchemical sayings attributed to Maria the Jewess or Maria the Prophetess, Moses' sister. More than one practitioner contemplated the possible alchemical nature of the Urim and Tumim, the stones on the breastplate of Aaron as well. These became quite quickly obsessions amongst certain types of alchemists. As a certain Raymond Leicht, is it Leicht or Leicht? Leicht, has pointed out, the great synthesis between alchemy and Kabbalistic symbolism is very much a Renaissance phenomenon. We begin to see experimental combinations of the two sciences in Europe from the early 16th century. Some work has been done on the Kabbalism in the Book of Balances of the 9th century Persian Sufi alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan, but there's been little research into the European phenomenon, the combinations between alchemy and Kabbalah. We have Raphael Patai's book, Jewish alchemists, but actually very little else. Despite the fact that many archives contain 16th, 17th, and 18th century alchemical manuscripts, either including Kabbalistic material or claiming to have been written by Kabbalists. So in this paper, I'm going to introduce and discuss a few of these experimental combinations of alchemy and Kabbalah in early modern literature. Okay, perhaps somewhat predictably, given his delight in shaking the pillars of orthodoxy, one of the first European responses to Kabbalah appears in the work attributed to the Swiss physician and exponent of chemical medicine, Theophrastus Paracelsus Bombastus of Hohenheim. On the tincture of the philosophers, he declares, if you do not understand the use of the Kabbalists and the old astronomers, you are not born by God for the spagyric art, or chosen by nature for Vulcan's work, or created to open your mouth about the alchemical art. For those of you as yet uninfected by the obsessive study of alchemy, the spagyric art is Paracelsus's term for alchemical separation and recombination of substance. It's a neologism from Greek, basically. Whereby the unwanted dross is removed and you're left with pure arcana, pure substances. He's often classed as the father of homeopathy, using poisons but highly purified to treat people. Okay. With him, the work of alchemy usually involved the search for chemical medicines rather than the traditional idea of transmutation of inferior metals into gold. Okay, looking through Paracelsus's genuine and pseudo-epigraphic works, it's fairly easy to find references to what he variously calls Kabbalah, Gabala, or Gabalia. True, most of these are concerned with angel magic and divination. But what becomes clear is that he connects or associates Kabbalah with both the sort of religio-psychological understanding of man and an intimate knowledge of the elements of creation. In his book of Perpetual Religion, he gives us a strong sense of how important Kabbalah is for, or his understanding of Kabbalah, is for reading the book of nature, be that man the microcosm or the creatures of the macrocosm. If we would know the inner nature of man by his outer nature, if we would understand his inner heaven by his outward aspect, if we would know the inner nature of trees, herbs, roots, stones by their outward aspect, we must pursue our exploration of nature on the foundation of Kabbalah. Okay. Now then. Paracelsus also provides us with an interesting insight into what he considers to be the numeric value of Kabbalah. He's approaching it from different angles. In a chapter of the instruments and philosophical vessel in his Aurora and Treasure of the Philosophers, he indicates its importance for the construction of laboratory equipment. Verily, our vessel is most chiefly known to the Kabbalists, because it ought to be framed according to a truly geometrical proportion and measure, and by, a certain quadrature of the circle. Okay, Paracelsus is intrigued by this new subject that's appeared in the West, as it were, but you can see he's toying with the idea. This work, the Aurora, was disseminated in a Latin translation by one of Paracelsus's most enthusiastic followers, the Belgian Gerard Dorn, who was also responsible for the popular dictionary of Theophrastus Paracelsus, most of which was plagiarized by a fellow Paracelsian, Martin Ruland, in the Lexicon of Alchemy. These, I have to say, were very influential. You find copies in many libraries. Okay, here is a brief extract from a Lexicon of Alchemy, don't forget. Kabbalistic art is the most secret science, which is affirmed to have been made known in a divine manner to Moses at the same time as the written law. It reveals to us the doctrine of the Messiah of God. It constitutes a bond of friendship between angels and the men who have been instructed in it. And, most importantly for your alchemist, it gives knowledge of all natural things. It goes on a bit further, but I'll just limit myself to that. Paracelsians do become, probably of all different streams of alchemical practice, they become the ones who are most interested in alchemy. Often because they sort of span the spectrum between physics and metaphysics, and whereas some practitioners really seem to be practicing quite sort of material approaches to alchemy. Okay, so taking the Christian spin on Jewish Kabbalah into consideration, and Paracelsus's famous rejection of the pagan philosophy of Aristotle and Galen, it's arguable that the Mosaic basis of Kabbalah would appeal far more legitimate as an adjunct to Paracelsian Christian philosophy of nature, particularly with the Christian reorientation of Kabbalah being performed at the time by Pico, Reuchlin, and Giorgi. All three of these Christian Kabbalists had promoted the similarity between the Kabbalist Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He, and the Pythagorean Tetractys. Okay. Presented as a triangle of points descending from a single point at the apex to 4 at the base, representing the numerological perfection of monad to quaternary, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. This represents for them, the dimensional movement from point to line to surface to volume. It's the descent of the elements from fire to air to water to earth, and so on and so forth, many different interpretations. This is, in many ways, what becomes linked with Kabbalah. When Christians are talking about Kabbalah, Pythagorean symbolic numbers are there almost always. This is, to a certain extent, encouraged. Okay, the terms used, monas, or unarius, binarius, ternarius, quaternarius, and denarius. It's encouraged by a famous saying that gets repeated over the centuries from Maria the Jewess, or attributed to her. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and by means of the 3rd and 4th achieves unity. Thus 2 are but 1, clear as mud. Yes. But this sort of encouraged a lot of speculation amongst alchemists who are trying to work with Kabbalah, seeing what they can get out of it. It was particularly the case in the works of Gerard Dorn, whom I mentioned, who devotes a whole book to the alchemical works attributed to the student of Johann Reuchlin, the abbot Johannes Tritemius, who was also the patron of Heinrich Agrippa, the famous author of 3 books of the cult philosophy. With Tritemius, we get let the binary be rejected, and the ternary will be convertible to the simplicity of unity. We get actually a lot of speculations on this level. There have been many speculations on the significance of these terms. In the Paracelsian Liber Azoth, we find Pythagorean symbolic numbers being used to make an explicit connection between alchemy and Kabbalah. Medieval alchemists had all held, I'm sure you know, that watery mercury and fiery sulfur are the 2 ingredients of the philosopher's stone. Paracelsus had sort of upset people by suggesting actually there's a 3rd, salt, the preservative, earthy salt is the 3rd ingredient. And here he's trying out, or pseudo-Paracelsus is trying out some combinations with Kabbalah. The reader seeking for insights discovers that the 3 primary constituents or modes of matter mercury, sulfur, and salt, are related to sulfur. Fiery sulfur conceals the Kabbalistic unarius in itself. Earthy salt conceals the Kabbalistic binarius. And then azot mundi, or mercury of the wise, has or is the Kabbalistic ternarius. Okay. One of Paracelsus's followers, Bernard Gilles Penot, who actually publishes the text that I mentioned at the beginning, the dialogue between nature and the son of philosophy, also turns to Kebala in a later work on the medical denuary, where he writes, "Such is Kebala by which they say all miracles have been performed since the beginning of the world." Penot paraphrases one of Pico's conclusions. If he is expert in Kebala, one who knows how to extend the quaternary into the denuary will have a method for deriving the name of 72 letters from the ineffable name. And there's Penot's paraphrase, is able to penetrate into the depths of the sciences. Again, I feel slightly like I'm teaching you all to suck eggs, but here we have Paracelsians who superimpose the tetragrammaton onto the Pythagorean tetractys, such that you can calculate the values, the cumulative values of these lines, and get the highly significant number 72. I'm sure you all know what it means, but the Christian Kabbalists didn't. So, for example, Guillaume Menens, in a book called 3 Books of the Golden Fleece in 1604, points out this is the 22 letters of the alphabet plus the 50 gates of understanding. Okay, from the first gate, the tetragrammaton itself, right up to the 50th gate, which is man. And this, I have to say, Christian Kabbalists who are alchemists are not sophisticated. The number 72 is one of their favorite numbers, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10. There's not a lot more. There's a bit more, but not so much. But they do quite a lot with it. Okay. Turning to a brief consideration of alchemical associations with letters of the alphabet, again, a different approach, seeing what they can do. The physician to Louis XIII, David de Planis-Campi, cites Paracelsus's treatise on the philosophical tincture and argues that the 3 mother letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Mem, and Shin, denotes the 3 Paracelsian principles of salt, mercury, and sulfur. Again, looking for ways to make connections. I mean, of course, this was influenced by the Sefer Yetzirah. That's published in a Latin translation, certainly in 1587 in Basel, and becomes hugely inspirational for Western Christians looking for ways of working with material in an alchemical sense. I'm going to give you a rather sort of phantasmagoric example of what one Christian Kabbalist, Heinrich Kunrat of Leipzig, in his book on primordial chaos, which might be a description of his mind. I love him. Anyway, this is what he does. Okay, he takes his speculative Kabbalah, uses it as for etymologizing the alchemical term elixir, spelt in his German way there, elixir. He glosses it as fortitudo, or strength, with the explanation that El in Hebrew means mighty or strong, in Latin. One, or I, means one, so primal matter. X is 10, the symbolic number of total perfection. And air, the Greek word, he says, in Latin is, well, splendor sive scintilla aut fulgor, a bright, shining fire spark or flash. Now, yes, from that we get various levels of preparation, variously called air, exair, ixair, and elixair. You get this sort of being used other times as well by 1 or 2 different authors. And although it might look fanciful, it's worth bearing in mind that the Picatrix, which has been mentioned already, also glosses elixir as fortitudo. That is the strength that breaks other strengths. Both the Picatrix and Kunrat presumably had in mind the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, where we get one line, it is the strongest fortitude of all fortitude because it can overcome every subtle thing and penetrate every solid. I know we're moving a long way from Jewish Kabbalah here, but this is what Christians are trying to do with some of their material. Okay, this line itself from the Emerald Tablet has been interpreted as meaning the philosopher's stone, the elixir, or the quintessence. And it calls to mind actually a genuine example of Kabbalist wordplay that was popular with Christian alchemists. The well-known etymology from the Bahir that the word shamaim, heaven, can be divided into the words esh v'maim, fire and water. Any alchemist, dare I say, worth his salt, knew that coelum, or heaven in Latin, was code for the alchemical quintessence, which was a fiery water. So these are sort of plays on words that inspire Western alchemists to continue looking for their fiery water. They found confirmation, really, in Kabbalistic sources. Okay, to give you another approach to what they're doing, this is Heinrich Kunrath in his Amphitheatre of Eternal Wisdom. He prominently places the Hebrew word, now Evan. I say it's Evan, we'll see. This is an engraving called the Alchemical Citadel. Here is a dragon on top of the rock, the Philosopher's Stone. I'm sorry about the reproduction, but actually it's quite hard to get. I'm arguing that these letters are Aleph, Beit, and Nun. Yeah? Suggesting the word Evan, rock or stone. In one interpretation, this is what...
Av and Ben also, right? Father and son.
Thank you. He's telepathically reading my mind. Yeah. And of course, Francesco Giorgi and many other Christian Kabbalists point out, yes, it's Av and Ben, father and son. So he draws, I've lost my place. This one word then, Evan, encapsulates an extremely important message for Kunrath. It intimates the analogical relationship. This is actually another manuscript version of it. Again, you're better to judge whether that really is Evan. Yeah. Okay. He wants to emphasize an analogical relationship between Christ's son, the Kabbalist son of the microcosm, and the philosopher's stone, the physico-chemical or alchemical son of the macrocosm. Most people say he sees this as an identity. It's not. It's an analogy. But I also want to ask, and this is where I'm showing my ignorance, I'm sorry, can you, from that, extract this word as well? To prophesy. What is to... Can you? I mean, he doesn't say it, but it's... Kunrath and people who sort of repeat his material, they are also strong believers in personal revelation through, divine inspiration. And so I'm wondering whether that could be extracted out. But to be honest...
If you read it clockwise or counterclockwise.
Yeah, quite. I mean, I know that the Nun is not a final letter. He's just given the... But it's sort of potentially... Oh, good. That's the first time I've stuck my neck out with that. But it seems a good place to do it. My head's still attached. Okay, shortly after the appearance of the full edition of Kunrath's Amphitheatre in 1609, France was, of course, to see the book of the hieroglyphs of Nicolas Flamel, famous from Harry Potter, purporting to be a copy of a manuscript by Abraham the Jew. Flamel is evidently delighted by his find and convinced of its relevance for alchemy, rhetorically asking his reader, is not this art Kabbalistical and full of secrets? And we get, he's careful to explain, although it was well and intelligibly figured and painted, yet no man could ever have been able to understand it without being well skilled in their Kabbalah, which goeth by tradition, his gloss of it. Joseph Dan would like that gloss, as opposed to reception, and without having well studied their books. Truth be told, there's very little Kabbalistic content in the Book of Hieroglyphs, despite it having been written by Abraham the Jew, in theory. Apart from fairly obvious Christian interpretations of engravings with biblical content. Nevertheless, these images contributed to the early modern fascination with convergences between alchemy and Kabbalah. I'm only going to show one or two images. We've got on the cross, we've also got Herod and the sacrifice of the innocents. These get picked up later in a text purporting to be an authentically Jewish text, and we'll get to that at the end of my fast gabble. Okay, turning back to David de Planis-Compi. In his bouquet composed of the most beautiful chemical flowers, he describes John Dee, the Elizabethan magus and natural philosopher, as being one of those most versed in chemical Kabbalah. This was primarily because of this work, the mathematically, magically, Kabbalistically, and anagogically explained Monas Hieroglyphica of 1564. Extremely influential in the history of occult philosophy, even if the most mystifying text, I think, I've ever tried to read. These hieroglyph here is formed from the astrological symbols for the 7 planets of the Ptolemaic cosmos, which also happen to be the symbols for the 7 major metals in alchemy. With this, he unites the practices of what he calls superior and inferior astronomy, i.e. astrology and alchemy. Kunrat is familiar with the monas of Dee, and in his book, The Amphitheatre, he cites Dee's distinction between his Kabbalah of the real and Kabbalah of the word. The former relates to the book of nature and the permutations of elements, the latter to the book of scripture. And Dee turns from an exclusively literal Kabbalistic reading of Hebrew letters and printed books to one connected with natural magic and deciphering the signatures of the cosmos. Just to show you, Heinrich is familiar with these monas. There it is on the entrance to the inner citadel, the drawbridge guarded by Hermes Trismegistus. And also we find it on another engraving. This is of the alchemical Rabis, the alchemical hermaphrodite, which has Hebrew elements, Urim and Esh. Is that Urim in the triangle? Again, it's, yeah, good, thanks. Never have I felt on such shaky ground, but it's good to have confirmation. Okay, on this bird, which is a composite bird representing color changes in alchemy, you find the word azot, which is a composite word, the O of it being the composite symbol or hieroglyph of John Dee. I don't know if many of you know, azoth is a very popular word in alchemy, and it's formed of the first and last letters of the Latin, Greek, and Hebrew alphabets, A to Z, Alpha and Omega, Aleph and Tau. Denoting primal and ultimate matter in alchemy. And since I'm dwelling on sort of wordplay which the Christian practitioners class as Kabbalistic, I should also mention the most famous example, the vitriol acrostic, translating as visit the innards of the earth or the interior of the earth. By rectifying, by repeated distillation, you will find the hidden stone. This appeal to Kabbalistic-minded alchemists is clear from the inclusion of this and other material in this book here, The Tree of Life, by Friedrich Geisler. The very title of Geisler's book alludes to the Kabbalistic Sephirot, and as we look through its pages, we discover that actually he's wildly enthusiastic about any author combining alchemy and Kabbalah. This red square I've put here is a rather blurry version of the vitriol acrostic. If we go to another page, we have we have variants of the tetractys and tetragrammaton combinations, physico-chemical ones, arithmetical ones, and divinely magical ones. We've got John Dee mentioned there, Kunrat, and as we go through in the book, we find Stefan Michelspacher's Kabbalah, the mirror of art and nature in alchemy. Even though this is labeled Kabbalah, the image, actually it's meant to be an astrological, alchemical image. Also, Raphael, or the Angel of Medicine, is replete with attempted combinations between alchemy and Kabbalah. And Johann Christoph Steb's Sephirotic Heaven of the Hebrews is yet another example of someone trying experimental combinations between the two sciences. How am I doing for time?
You finished 5 minutes ago.
No! Are you serious? 8. Okay, I think it's time finally. Okay, to give me a slap round the head. If Pico della Mirandola is the father of Christian Kabbalah, the author of these books is the father of Kabbalistic alchemy or chemical Kabbalah. The Venetian priest Giovanni Agostino Panteo. He published a work called The Art of Metallic Transmutation, first of all in 1519, and then the work on the right, the Voarkadumia Against Alchemy in 1530. In the latter book, Pantheus presents the first example we have of what he calls the Kabbalah of metals, saying it's been handed down from Tubal-Cain in Genesis, and he's very aware that the Council of Venice has just said alchemy is forbidden. It was accepted in the previous century, but not in the early 16th. So he says, I'm not doing alchemy, I'm doing Voarkadumia. Okay? And he publishes the Voarkadumia Against Alchemy, an art distinct also from Archemy and Sophia, with opportune additions, proportions, numbers, and figures. This is a peculiar book. It tries to use Kabbalah, it tries to use alchemy, it also has images of coining machines. But anyway, I'll give you some example. Alchemia, by a sort of mock Kabbalist etymology is translated as the ferment of vain counsel and is only related to sophisticatio, to faking true gold. Alchemia is the ferment of true counsel and is connected with genuine transmutation, but isn't as successful as his voarchidumia. And here maybe you can help me with this. Voarch is glossed by Pantheus as an unidentified Chaldean or maybe even Indian word for gold. Does Voarch ring any bells with anyone? No, other than his psychoanalyst maybe? Yeah. Okay, Bait is Hebrew for two, and Adumot is from Aduma, yeah? Hebrew for carnelian or ruby, we are told. Yeah, Pantheus puts it as gold from two rubies. Okay, and to give you, Sophia, by the way, is classed as okay but not as efficient as voarchidumia in producing gold. To give you an example of the Kabbalah element, the chapter that sounds the most Kabbalistic is this mixture of the roots of the unity of the 72 voarchidumic elements. It's that number again. We get odd words, amphibar, martex, stagno, or stagno, or risu, okay, which puzzles even his readers, I have to say. Risu is glossed as thelima, or how do I pronounce this? Will in Hebrew. Ratzon, okay. And we find, if we look further in the book, that all of these words are classed as deknam, as cover names for gold. Okay, so the mystery deepens. Nicholas said, very helpfully in an article on the alchemo-kabbalistic significance of gold, points out that resh and sadi are in both these words, and so maybe that's a cover name that they're using for gold. Okay, going through, we discover he does numeric calculations based on stagno, for example, tin, and this mysterious risu. They all calculate in the end to 72. So again, highly significant. This strange book, I have to say, also includes alphabets based on Hebrew, which turn up in later occult literature. For example, Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. We also know John Dee had a copy of this book. It's in the British Library. You can go and read it with his annotations. And he very sweetly discovers, I'm delighted to say, that John Dee also calculates to, guess what number? 72. So he's both, yes, he's the philosopher and the philosopher's stone. And Julie's just said, hurry up. So I'll hurry up. I'll scoot through this. The Kebala unveiled in the mid-17th century promotes this combination further. The book at the beginning is useful for philologists, philosophers, theologians of all religions, and phylochemists. It's for the Hebrew chemistry and wisdom-loving reader. And here we seem to get a text which is claiming to be truly a Hebrew Jewish text. And then here's an example. Based on Daniel 7:5, behold, another beast like a bear stood up on one side and so forth. We get this. We're told the phrase, let him eat flesh, really means let him digest an antimony product, stibium. And basar is reduced to 7, and puk, or stibium, is also reduced to 7. And here, okay, it's a sort of simple example of Kabbalistic play. If you don't know, antimony is actually very important. It's something that metallurgists as well use to remove other excess alloys from gold. And what you're left with after the various process using antimony is pure gold. This is represented often in alchemy as a wolf that devours a king. The wolf is the antimony. This is a nice, maybe isn't the word, engraving from Michael Myers' Atalangafugians, complete with music, but no growling wolf. Okay, shooting through. This text in the Kebala Unveiled is called the Eshmetzaref, translated by English readers as the Purifying Fire. And actually, it's the first text I know that really, even though we've got planetary attributions related to the Tree of Life, in the Eshmetzaref, we're finally getting an alchemist who's trying to make alchemical models of how you fit the metals onto the Tree of Life. This is the first model, where you've got the root of the metals, the primal matter, mapped onto Keter, and then Chokmah as Saturn or lead, and Bina as Jupiter, tin, and so forth. This seems quite odd at first, because if Keter is meant to be the sort of most, what can I say, nebulous, purest Sephira on the Tree of Life, then why would you begin with, well, the primal substance might work, but why would Hokma be lead, which is the worst and most impure metal? It seems a strange map to use. This one seems a bit different. It's using the 3 supernals as the 3 Paracelsian substances of mercury, sulfur, and salt. So we began with Paracelsus using Kebala. Here we seem to have a Kabbalist using Paracelsus as a model. It's interesting to notice that Isaac Newton in a manuscript is one of the readers of this book and is speculating on it. Okay, and I'll have to zoom through these. This is a text claiming to be Jewish that uses, it recycles some of Nicolas Flamel. It also uses original images. Here we've got Oren Eretz. Gives some interpretations. Here we have Azot linked with Tohu from the Genesis account. We also have this weird diagram. I try to figure out what it is from this celestial alphabet that's in the Pantheos book and in Agrippa. But I can't, if any of you think of words that could be hidden there, I would love to know. My Hebrew is awful and my imagination is even worse. Yeah, that's finally got them interested. They're trying, yeah, it's a puzzle. Forgive me, I'll shoot on. I can give you a PDF of this if you want. Okay, it also has a glossary of terms, Kabbalistic terms, but used in an alchemical context. But what I want to just quickly tease you with, because I need help with it, at the Getty they have manuscripts of 17th century, late 17th century manuscripts of people attempting to combine alchemy and Kabbalah. Here you've got it very laboratory-based, but then you've got Urim and Tumim, you've got Shemaim, you've got geometrical combinations as well for Shemaim. But the best one is this. And just forgive me, Yossi, because I know you're coming. It's a text called The Week of Weeks of the Kabbalists, Mages, Brahmins, and all wise men of antiquity. It gives you 6 weeks. Each week is governed by a different alphabet. Yeah. And I found this a week before I came here, so I am totally ignorant. There's a French commentary at the back, and let me just show you a few of these. This is the image I began with. Yeah. The French commentary at the end says that it's written in the Hebraic letters of ancient Babylon, the first Babylon. In this we see 2 characters of Saturn, and the figure is a winged serpent biting its tail on a black square. Week 1, day 2 has the serpent in a black cube. Okay, that's as far as we go, really. Then we get these things. For example, this. Yeah, week 3, day 1, a lion. This is meant to be Chaldean language. We've got the strength of Dagon. Now, is this true? That's what the French commentator is saying.
Yeah, but it's reversed. It's on the top, the left word is Koach.
Oh.
And the right one is the Bavel of
Yes.
Babylon. And I don't know about the something in the middle.
Thanks.
So apparently they're not sure how to read the Hebrew.
No, I get the feeling. Certainly,
No, it says Ari Lazan.
yes. Yeah. The Ari I could understand for the lion.
Angry lion.
But it's not Lurianic Ari, I guess.
No.
Sorry. Okay, so just very quickly to show you. It's got this one, 2 glyphs for Mercury, a philosophical egg. Okay. The French commentator says, it says, above is fire without end, and below is I die in order to live without end. And you can all go. I can give you the link to this if you want to go and look at it. Here are more. There's an alchemical furnace, a bird in a flask, a conjunction.
Maybe Shovavim, where like the 6 weeks of Shovavim, a lot of people count.
Okay.
And that's this portion from the book of Shemot, Exodus.
Yeah.
And it talks about the plagues in those 6 weeks, and people follow these 6 weeks and they fast a lot during those weeks.
Now that's really nice. See what you think. Okay, we've got sort of Hebrew and Chaldean. Then we get Greek. Okay, this is week 4 from memory. Okay, and then we get Syriac, we are told. Yeah? It's interesting, no images. All the others do have images, but these, they've not been drawn in. And then, okay, we end with Latin, with Antichristus, things from the book of Revelations and so forth, a lion again. And okay, so I'd show you that. I haven't done work on it, but I just wish I'd found this 6 months ago and then could have done something coherent for you. But I thought I'd show you. And just to say that even though most of the people I've shown you don't seem to be doing much with Kabbalah, they don't seem to be very aware of Jewish sources. This is an exception. Blaise de Vigenère, his treatise on fire and salt, I've listed. Quotes from the Zohar, he's reading the original and he seems to be understanding it. Jikatilla from the Nut Garden, and also from is it the Sha'are Ora, the Gates of Light? Pantheos is aware of, and it's a curious combination. It's laboratory practice, but also color changes based on the Sephirot. So you get, you start getting people doing it. I'm not sure if any of them felt that their experiments were successful. They seem to be doing it for various reasons. Some are using it as justification for alchemical interpretations of Genesis, which infuriated Pierre Gassendi and Marin Mersenne, because it's reducing scripture to a sort of materialistic reading. Others were using it to try and find insights into manuscripts by using different exegetical techniques. The standard ones had failed. Some are trying to map the two intellectual systems together. Some are trying to decode words by letter permutations, others by numeric permutations, all seeming to give each other confusing headaches, because readers who are still fascinated still don't seem to know what's going on. Anyway, even though I've mentioned Paracelsus and Paracelsians, ironically, Paracelsus's preference for the vernacular and predilection for neologisms seems to have broken this apart in many ways, because it devalues the notion of an innate value to language, which is surely inherent to a belief in Kabbalah. But anyway, perhaps his introduction of Kabbalah into the mixture was enough to sort of stir things up and, dare I say, quicken the alchemical imagination.